Well, according to record, Zoroastrian, the Greek record, Zoroaster was giving his foundation 6,500 years BC. But the language he was talking in was the state, formal, respectful language. Like I, for instance, keep and use a King James Bible, but I was not born before 1611 and don't normally speak in that way, these and thous and thine and so forth. But according to some historical records that we've got, they put him at 6,500 BC. But nothing particularly happens as regards influencing other nations until, we become very aware of it, say, 1500 BC. But it does seem to be officially followed in what we think of as Persia down those millennia. Now that's an incredibly long time from our point of view and our ability to measure, to account for the past. It would mean with, current possibilities as we see it, that this is way before the end of the Ice Age. Not an Ice Age that's, we're not talking about a snowballing of the planet, we're just talking about ice sheets covering especially much of Northern Europe and North America. You see, it's a bit like, for instance, teaching of Plato, 400 odd BC, doesn't mean that the Greek state changed into what Plato conceives of as the ideal republic. But the teaching's there. And it influences the country in which it sort of takes off in. And but typically in a very degenerate or modified form. So, for instance, we get the teaching of Jesus that a story is about 2,000 years ago. But the Christian society of just a few hundred years later, Constantine, 300 and something or other, early 300, 300s, you've got a society that is supposedly following the story, but it's a very specific and, well, what one might call degenerate, or in some ways quite twisted fundamentalist view, or literalist view rather, not something about fundamentalist, but literalist view of what the teaching is. And you might wonder, looking at what you think is the relevant scripture that survives, how that really does relate that well at all to the religion that's owning its name. And 2,000 years later, how much more so? And the history of its application may seem to be quite contrary indeed to the original teaching, even as surviving in the modified story. To say then there is an initial influence, but the outcome of the influence can be dramatically different to that initial conception, apparently, as the conception was to the world in which it was given birth. So, Ahura Mazda is a fascinating conception in Zoroastrianism and the story, and it's probably a dramatic upgrade on the state of affairs that it was addressed to changing. But the change that comes about can be hardly conceivable from the new ideas that are in the story originally. So the Persian Empire, although we might say is Zoroastrian, is hardly true to its original conception by the founder, whoever it was, or whoever the writer of the story of it was. So, for instance, again, Buddha may upgrade Indian religion, what we might call Hinduism, collectively or whatever, with his ideas, but the establishment Buddhism that develops from that could be dramatically different. It may really be the case that Buddha was getting rid of the unnecessary parts of religion, the religiosity, the rituals, and so forth. But what the world seems to put in its place, supposedly following the teaching, ends up with no theology at all. Conceptions that don't have God in are ritualistic in their way. New conception of ritualism hardly a credit to the original founder. Certainly Christianity, I say certainly, but I mean Christianity certainly, to use the word, seems to have developed that way. And this seems to usually be the case of the development of almost anything. What it's conceived of and how it actually develops are dramatically different. It's perhaps never really clear that the founder would be happy with that which is built upon, supposedly, his insights. I think you could say in a Buddhist type way of reasoning that the outcome is always a consequence of the original set of causes and conditions plus the new idea. And that's can be dramatically different to what the new idea conceives of alone initially. We see this in very short periods of time with almost any organisation, that the real change comes with the turnover of the population, the old ways dying out with the death of the people that have the old ways, and the new generation replacing such gradually according to the circumstances they find themselves in and the ideas they picked up from their upbringing and their experience, which is different, of course, now to their parents and so forth. Do that over a few thousand years and, well, the consequences possibly unrecognizable in terms of the initial cause or the initial insight that's supposedly bringing the change. Nothing new here, is there? From our point of view, then, there's tremendous uncertainty whenever you introduce some new idea, new way of doing things. There's tremendous uncertainty in what the consequence will be, especially the further you move into the future. And each future is its own experience and teaching, according to whatever record remains of such into the next future, and so forth. It's an ongoing school that teaches those in attendance through time. Thank you, Dad. So to recast it, Zoroaster could have been preaching, if you like, holding forth in something like 650 BC, and echoing what he understood to be the original teaching of the Iranian region, going right back however far, so that you could see the roots of his teaching 6,000 years earlier. And he's trying to revive what he feels is the true and honourable teaching. it may have been, for instance, that the worship of the gods and the dominance of such was a degeneration of the original teaching, and he wants to return to the pure form which he sees as and understands to be Ashura Mazda and the seven aspects or spirits, so to speak, that in a way constitute his personhood, like forward thinking and so forth. But this is revolutionary compared to the degenerate teaching of the ancient time. So he's a reformer, going back to fundamentalism. Whatever it is, it has a great impact. And if I draw an analogy, only to make it clear what I mean, that if I suddenly press that we should be following the Jesus story and not a degenerate religion that's come from that, then I might be harassed by the current religious community because, of course, it's destructive to their empire, their way of life, you know. And in a similar sort of way, one could say that Christianity itself looks like some sort of reformed or upgrade to Mithraism, which is far older. That in some sense you can either see it as an evolution of, or as some sort of reforming, going back to original principles without the degeneration. Mithraism resulting in not ultimately, but developing towards a corrupt worship of the gods. And someone realizes that this needs to be reformed and corrected, and so they preach something that invades the current ideas in going back to such purity, and is cast in a contrasting light. So much so that, like Judaism, Christianity becomes utterly rejecting of everything else. It's an extremism that's defended by being more fundamentally right and true to the original purpose of God, or whatever it was, you know. And that teaching is the personification of the prophet, so that he's, in the case of Jesus, been, you know, before time was, I was. I am the original teaching. Yeah. Thank you, Dad. I'm reminded of something someone said to me the other night at a philosophy type meeting, that hydrogen and oxygen are both very distinct in the manner of what they are, But when they come together and form water, they're dramatically different to either of the two originals. That, you know, two couples coming down to breakfast again, they have breakfast not in the way that either of them are used to, but they establish a new way of life. Breakfast is different to what they used to do at home, which was different to each other again. If you like, a bad marriage would be where one keeps the original and the new simply adapts to it and takes on same pattern, a bit like the Indian notion of the wife came to live with the husband's mother to see how to look after him and what his way of life was and the way of life that she now has to adapt to, which was, from a Western point of view, modern point of view, a tragic situation that she was so much a non-person that she just vanishes. But equally to treat the other partner as such that they must totally adapt. Whichever partner it was would have been a great imposition, and we feel something wrong. That really the two of them simply come to a completely new way of life that's born of the marriage of the two of them together. And we have this notion too in being born again spiritually, that the Holy Spirit in some sort of evangelical Christian view comes into the person and the two make something that's born again. I'm a new creation, I'm a brand new man. Old things have passed away, I've been born again. More than a conqueror, that's what I am. I'm a new creation, I'm a brand new man. And there's great inspiration in this song, although it's quite childlike. You know, it's a kiddie type song almost, isn't it? I'm a new creation, I'm a brand new man. Old things have passed away, I've been born again. More than a conqueror, that's what I am. I'm a new creation, I'm a brand new man. Thank you, Dad. Well, was it the purity of the new inspiration that drove out the traditionals to form these other religions like Buddhism or Christianity and so on? And that these dominant, distinguishing splinter groups from the original Persia form the warring individual nations of Europe and the Middle East and so on, or Far East, or was it that the true spirit of Zoroaster was cast out, and it was that forms these new religions that are not the old degenerate splintering off dominant worship of the gods type people, but new enlightened Buddhism or Christianity in what we like to think of as their pure form. Yeah, well, it depends who you are, how you see it. Historicity is like that. It so depends on the author, doesn't it? Thank you, Dad.